When I was a little girl, my family listened to CBC Radio 2. All classical, all the time. I wanted to listen to 630 CHED, Edmonton's foremost rock station on the AM dial, but no, we had to listen to CBC Radio 2 classical. The one sort of compromise that we came to was every night after dinner, when I helped my mom do the dishes, we would listen to soft rock. And I learned all about love through the lyrics of Paul Anka and Dionne Warwick and the Carpenters, and even Barbra Streisand and Neil Diamond. I actually remember listening to this song and coming to the realization that this was a breakup song. When Neil Diamond hit that line, "You think I would learn how to tell you goodbye?" My little heart said, no. Just bring her the flowers. Just ask him about his day. But we know that relationships are a little more complicated than that, aren't they? And I suspect that while most of us hopefully have some experiences of the amazing love that Song of Songs has introduced us to in the first 2 weeks of our series, even more so, we have experiences of disappointment, of unmet expectations, and of goodbyes. Now, before we dive into that, though, let me just tell you a little bit about Song of Songs if you haven't been here for the first 2 weeks or if you just need a little reminder. Song of Songs is basically the love song to end all love songs. And what it does is it invites us into this experience of two young lovers who are longing to be together, who want to express their love with their whole selves. But it's also woven into this poem is a critique of common expressions of sexuality of the day. Expressions like King Solomon, who the poem talks about with his 700 wives, the faceless women in his harem. Song of Songs also deeply affirms our physicality, the fact that we are physical people. We don't just have bodies. Our bodies are an integral part of who we are, and we're meant to enjoy the world through them. And so, expressions of love and intimacy, and yes, even sex, are good. But what we'll see today is that in Song of Songs, there's also this recognition that if we're going to talk about love and the amazing consummation of love, we also have to talk about the flip side, which is unmet desires and disappointment. I was sound asleep, but in my dreams I was wide awake. Oh, listen, it's the sound of my lover knocking, calling. Let me in, dear companion, dearest friend, my dove, consummate lover. I'm soaked with the dampness of the night, drenched with dew, shivering and cold. But I'm in my nightgown. Do you expect me to get dressed? I'm bathed and in bed. Do you want me to get dirty? But my lover wouldn't take no for an answer, and the longer he knocked, the more excited I became. I got up to open the door to my lover, sweetly ready to receive him, desiring and expectant as I turned the door handle. But when I opened the door, he was gone. My loved one had tired of waiting and left, and I died inside. I felt so bad. I ran out looking for him, but he was nowhere to be found. I called into the darkness, but no answer. The night watchmen found me as they patrolled the streets of the city. They slapped and beat and bruised me, ripping off my clothes, these watchmen who were supposed to be guarding the city. I beg you, sisters in Jerusalem, if you find my lover, please tell him I want him, that I'm heartsick with love for him. This is kind of like the ancient Near East version of I have a headache. Barbra Streisand says, you roll over and turn out the light. And the Song of Solomon woman here says, I don't want to put my robe on. But as one commentator points out, with the intentions of her visitor, why would she need to put a robe on? We're not sure. And what this poem uncovers about our sexuality is that it's not so much about the act of sex, but more about what is behind the act of sex. Like, what would motivate someone to let anyone in their door, so to speak, when it can lead to the kind of longing and heart sickness that this passage describes, the feeling of death. She even describes it as a beating by the night watchman, this terrible, violent vulnerability. Well, the secret of this is found in the creation story. Joe talked a little bit about this last week. You'll remember in the creation story that when the height of creation is man and woman, when God creates man and woman, and the reason why he calls them very good is because they live exposed and unashamed with one another. They live together as one. And then sin enters the world and it starts to break apart and fragment this relationship. And ever since then, we're trying to get back to what we were created for this oneness, for this knowing and being known. Deb Hirsch puts it like this: sexuality can be described as the deep desire and longing that drives us beyond ourselves in an attempt to connect with, to understand that which is other than ourselves. Essentially, it is a longing to know and be known by other people. Because our sexuality is about our desire to know and be known, it is intricately woven into our spirituality as well. In fact, you cannot separate one out from the other. Because behind the desire of both of them is this desire to transcend ourselves, to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, to use our creative energy to produce something that outlasts us, like a book or a piece of art, or a memory in the mind of a loved one, or a baby. It's also the desire to experience close relationships with one another and be loved for who we are. So our spirituality is about our desire to overcome our alienation from God, to know God, be known by God, and to be loved by God. And then our sexuality is about our desire to overcome our alienation with one another, to know and be known by one another, and to be loved by one another. Which shows us this, that our definition of sexuality needs to expand. Because this narrow view that we have of sex, which says that I am sexual only if I am engaging in the act of sex or coming to some kind of climax, has led to all kinds of issues with the way that we treat one another and see ourselves. And there was a really good example of this in the news this week. Some of you know about the Aziz Ansari story. For those of you who don't, Aziz Ansari is sort of this very likable comedian who has been on lots of sitcoms, has his own show on Netflix. And this week, a woman came out to tell about a bad date she had with Ansari. And basically what happened was this. They went out for dinner together, and then they went back to his place, and he kind of coerced her and convinced her to engage in sexual acts that she wasn't comfortable with and that she actually said no to. And this story really troubled me. My kids will tell you that I made them talk about it and discuss it with me, and I read all kinds of articles about it, and I realized that what really troubled me, besides the fact that Ansari acted the way that he did, which just seems to not be surprising these days, was that this girl, while she had the courage to say no, somehow didn't have the understanding of sex, or I don't know, to actually get herself out the door when her no wasn't respected. And it just made me think, something is wrong with the way that we are doing this. And I'm not alone. The feminist writer and speaker, Jessica Valenti, tweeted, "A lot of men will read the post about Aziz Ansari and see an everyday, reasonable sexual interaction. But part of what women are saying right now is that what the culture considers normal sexual encounters are not working for us, and they are oftentimes harmful." What is it about our understanding of sex that allows for this kind of interaction, and in fact makes them commonplace? I think we've set up a scenario where sex is only about having our needs met. And it's not embedded in relationships where we can have frank and open conversations about what's acceptable and what's not. In addition, it's not embedded in relationships where we know we can wake up the next morning and we're going to be loved regardless of what happened the night before. We've mixed up what sex is for. And you know what? Song of Songs had its own Aziz Ansari. Who is this coming up from the wilderness like a column of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and incense, made from all the spices of the merchant? Look, it is Solomon's carriage, escorted by 60 warriors, the noblest of Israel, all of them wearing the sword, all experienced in battle, each with his sword at his side, prepared for the terrors of the night. King Solomon made for himself the carriage. He made it of wood from Lebanon, its posts he made of silver, its base of gold, its seat upholstered with purple, its interior inlaid with love. Daughters of Jerusalem, come out and look, you daughters of Zion. Now, here's a little clue for when you're reading the book of Song of Songs. The action most often takes place against the backdrop of one of two settings. It's either the garden, which is indicative of this like lush, mutual, fruitful relationship, like sort of pre-fall Adam and Eve relationship. And usually it's the poem of the lovers that takes place at this backdrop. The other backdrop is the desert or the wilderness. And what it signifies is hostility and danger. And here, through the wilderness, we see Solomon coming on his mighty chariot. He is the conqueror. In this poetry, there's a sense that Solomon not only conquers militarily, but he also has multiple conquests when it comes to women as well. Remember those 700 women in the harem? There's the smell of sacrifice in the air, like he just is sacrificing people to his own needs. But what's sort of most apparent is that you'll notice that the poem is not about the women. Unlike the poem of the lover who talks about the particular beauty of the woman he loves, this instead is all about the great Solomon. It's objectification. We've been doing this for centuries. And sorry, the Me Too movement, these are just variations on a theme. And I feel like we kind of see the young woman from the Ansari story in here too. That last line where she says, "Come on, daughters of Jerusalem, look at this amazing Solomon. How you are so lucky to have his attention. How amazed and starstruck you should be." It's the way it is now, and it's the way it has always been. Or is it? Because at the heart of our longings and desires is that we wouldn't just be one other face in the crowd, a door to be entered, but that actually we would be unique, that we would be the man, the woman. We want to matter for who we are. We want to be able to gather up the whole of who we are and put it in front of someone and be told, yes, I want that whole thing, the whole deal. Not just the one thing, I want to be with you as you are. And instead, we use our we use our desire to satisfy our urges, and then we just break off parts of ourselves and leave this wreckage in our wake. And the point of that is this, is that all of you matters, and all of you matter. And what that means is that you have to treat your body as if it matters, and you have to treat other people's bodies as if they matter. That makes everything way better, but way more complicated. Because it means that I have to be brave enough to say no, and then also get up and leave when my no isn't respected. But it also means that I need to have enough self-respect to take a no as a no, and have respect for others so that I take their no as a no. It also means mostly that I have to commit to relationships, to people who are complicated and annoying, and sometimes don't do what I want them to do when I want them to do it. Now, we may not have our own Me Too stories. I hope there are some of you out there who do not have a Me Too story. But this larger cultural conversation gives us a space to ask some important questions. Questions like, is the way that I am practicing my sexuality bringing integration, healing, and wholeness to myself and to the people I interact with? Is the way that I'm practicing my sexuality making my family stronger or tearing my family apart? Is it making my community stronger or tearing my community apart? Is it keeping me cloistered and closed off in a dark room, or is it opening me up to love and risk? Am I using my sexuality in a way that just meets my own needs? Or do I understand that the way that I use it reveals what I believe about my value and the value of others? So we've talked about how the culture has gotten sex wrong, but what about us, the church? I don't know if we've done much better. Most often, our temptation is to reject our sexuality, is to repress and deny, just not talk about it, nothing's out in the open. But the problem is that repression of our sexual desires is repression of the very energy that propels us outside of ourselves and into relationship with other people. In addition, it doesn't seem from the example of Song of Songs that repression is on the table. Listen to this. My beloved thrust his hand into the opening, and my inmost being yearned for him. I arose to open to my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh upon the handles of the bolt. That's talking about what you think it's talking about. And there might have been some angry texts sent to Joe this week when I realized this was part of my passage. Throughout history, the church has tried to get around the fact that Song of Songs is in actuality talking about sex. You know, it's just about the church and Jesus, or it's about Israel and God. And as a church, we've done the same thing. We've narrowed our view of sexuality. We've done it in a different way than our culture has, but we've done it and sort of taken the life out of it. And my experience of it has been this, that we have two storylines. You're either married and you're having great sex, or you're unmarried and sex is dangerous. And do you know what these two storylines do? Well, in the first case, what they do is they put incredible pressure on the marital relationship. And there's sort of this sense that as soon as you find that perfect person and the ceremony takes place, then all of your needs will be met forever and always. And if they're not, then probably, there's something wrong with your marriage or your relationship. The second storyline has done damage this way, is that when a single person experiences their sexuality, they think it's dangerous, and so they repress it, and it comes out sideways. Or alternatively, they experience their sexuality, and then they think they're dangerous, and there's something wrong with them. These storylines also don't account for the fact that most of our experiences of sexuality are pretty messy. They don't fit into either one of these storylines. Maybe some of your storylines do, but a lot of ours don't. And we need a spot to talk about the ways we've been victimized, the mistakes we've made, and the ways we are seeking to move beyond these things to practice our sexuality in a more life-giving way. I have a complicated past. I do not fit into these storylines. And I assume that most of you do as well. Is our understanding of God and sexuality broad enough to sort of encounter these stories and bring them into line with God's stories to bring wholeness and healing to our broken parts, as well as celebrate the healthy and whole parts? Now, in order to kind of expand our view of sexuality, I'm going to get up on my soapbox for a little while here. I am single. I've been single for a long time, and I want to be known. I want to be loved. I want someone to be interested in my day-to-day life. I want someone to notice if my plane is late. I need someone to vent to. I want to be part of something bigger than myself, and that means that I am a sexual person. Another thing about singleness is that it's hard. It's painful. And what makes it painful is not that there's something wrong with being single, but that the world makes us feel like such weirdos for being single. The whole world is set up for two. So every time you try to encounter the culture, you're made to feel like maybe there's something wrong with you because you're not paired off. Examples of this are I've been left out of friend groups because I'm not paired off. One other example of this is that for years I could not book a holiday online because Expedia just does not have the brains to recognize one mom and 4 kids, which maybe it shouldn't. That's kind of crazy. But you know what? There's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing weird about being single. And I say this with grace, but when you come up to me and you ask me, sort of with that confused look in your eye, why aren't you married? What it says to me, whether you mean it to or not, is, what is wrong with you? What can't I see that is keeping this situation from pairing up? You seem to be able to carry on a conversation. You're relatively good looking, no visible skin tags. What is wrong with you? But the church should be different from the culture, because actually, Scripture points out that singleness is the preferred status. There are passages that say so, and if you want to know them, you come and see me. But besides that, Jesus, who was the perfect example of what it is to live intimately with others, to experience relationship, to love and give himself in love, to be a perfect human being, he was single. Mic drop, right? Single people play a really important role in the church. We are a witness against the messianic expectations that we tend to put on marriage. You see, marriage isn't meant to sustain all of our needs, all of our expectations. We were meant to live in a web of relationships, whether we're married or single, and we were meant to worship God alone. We remind you that the truth is that God makes his family by adoption, not by birth. And so if we're a part of the family of God, we all belong to one another, and that actually supersedes the biological families that we belong to. I am your sister, and you're stuck with me. We also call you to a deeper sense of hospitality. Now, hospitality isn't just inviting someone over for roast after Sunday service, although that is a very hospitable act. Hospitality at its deepest sort of meaning is the realization that I meet Jesus in people who are other than me, and so I need to encounter them. When we welcome the stranger, we welcome Jesus. And so I encourage you to leave one chair open in your life and welcome someone who is not paired off. And I ask you, as the church, do you have singles worked seamlessly into the fabric of your life? I can say that to singles about marrieds too, because we do it to you guys. It's like all they do is talk about their children when we're together or talk about one another. That's why they need you in their life, because then they can talk about other things. We need one another. Don't parcel each other off as someone who is not like me. Include someone who is not paired off in your life. And I don't mean a pity invite. We can smell those from a mile away. I mean actually intentionally make them a part of your life. I am the 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th. I think I've even been the 11th wheel in friendship groups. And you know what? We're so used to it by now, nobody even notices. We just love each other. It's just normal. Okay, enough lecturing. Here's the bad, good news about our sexuality. No one comes to full peace with their sexuality in this lifetime, not those in committed relationships and not those who are single. There are always unmet desires. For sure, we're going to have these times where we feel fulfilled and loved and everything is right with the world, but these are not going to be sustained, and there are times when we're not going to experience the happy ending. But Song of Songs gives us a clue as to how to live with this too. But when I opened the door, he was gone. My loved one had tired of waiting and left, and I died inside. I felt so bad. I ran out looking for him, but he was nowhere to be found. I called into the darkness, but no answer. The night watchmen found me as they patrolled the streets of the city. They slapped and beat and bruised me, ripping off my clothes, those watchmen who were supposed to be guarding the city. So, What does the woman do when she goes to the door and the person she desires is not there? Her love does not alter, but her expression of her love does. And so often, our reaction or our response to our unmet desires and longings is to give up on love altogether, to become cynical, to not ask him about his day because he didn't bring me flowers. My own experiences with love have admittedly made me a little cynical. My son and I might have shared a high five the other day when we both realized that we didn't believe in one true love. And sometimes I see how that cynicism sometimes colors the good things that come my way. And one example is that this summer, I performed the marriage ceremony for a friend of mine who married this wonderful man they were a great match. They loved one another very much. They couldn't wait to get married. And as I was preparing the message, I was kind of trying to line up their experience of love with my experience of love. I was trying to fit them together. And this is the conclusion I came to, that it takes that kind of insane love to make the radical commitments that marriage requires. And then it takes the radical commitments that we made in marriage to carry us through when the insane love kind of waxes and wanes. So don't steal it. It's real. In fact, it's more real than the wary cynicism that creeps up on us when things don't go our way. In fact, perhaps the real problem with marriage is not that we come to our senses too late, but that we come to our senses at all. Love has drawn us out of ourselves and enabled us for a while and to an extent to behave unselfishly. So what do we do when it's not so easy to behave unselfishly? Well, we need to learn how to live well with these unmet desires. In fact, it's how we deal with them that actually reveals the kind of people we are, as well as sort of forms the kind of people we are. When there's distance between what we desire, between us and what we desire, it forces us to figure out, engage in life, and figure out how to narrow the distance, how to come to peace with our unmet expectations. It keeps us moving. It keeps us going outside of ourselves. It keeps driving us out of our comfort zone, and it keeps us moving toward God and His good future. Our driving force as the people of God, whether we are married or single, is to join God in His good work to renew the whole earth. And our sexuality is part of the energy behind this. How do we use our desires, our unmet expectations, our longings to witness to the fact that God is putting everything back together again, including us? Well, Jesus gives us a clue as to how to do this in the way that He lived His life, as do the lovers in the Song of Songs. We bring redemption and renewal by giving ourselves away in love over and over again, even after hurt and disappointment. So, marrieds, have you come to your senses? Have you stopped giving yourself with abandon to your spouse? Give the flowers, take the Tylenol, attend to your relationship. Remember the wild love that propelled you into the insanity that is called marriage. Remember your forever friend. And like the lover in the Song of Songs, go after them. Singles, you have a full life to live right now. Stop waiting or looking for some perfect future or some perfect individual to fulfill your desires. Instead, identify the people who know you and love you in your life right now and invest and dig into those relationships. And then look up and out, marrieds too, and start to include other people in those relationships. And if you have a bad habit of tapping out of relationships with people outside of romantic partners, stop it. Figure it out. Find someone to commit to. Find a community. Start to dig in and invest in people. When I was a little girl, my grandma used to read me a book that went like this. Who loves Sally? Tell me do. Somebody loves her. I wonder who. And then the story went on to talk about all the people that loved little Sally, her uncle, her neighbor, her grandma, her grandpa, her brother. Of course, when my grandma read me the story, she would replace Sally with Allison. Who loves Allison? Tell me, do. Somebody loves her. I wonder who. I, in turn, read this book to my daughter Ella when she was a little girl. And Ella always had a soother in her mouth when she was little, and she could hold it in the side of her mouth like a cigar and talk out the other side of her mouth. And she also had a lisp, super cute. We read that book so many times that she had all of the words memorized. And so as our habit started to become that I would start reading it, and then as we went through the book, I would kind of get quieter and quieter so that she said the last line all by herself. The second last line, which I read with Ella but was very quiet, said, "But who loves Ella more than the rest?" And then I would stop reading and she would say, "Jesus, it's Jesus who loves her the best." There are many ways to experience love in this world, but the best one is available to all of us, no matter who we are. Jesus, it's Jesus who loves us the best.